Hey everyone, it's Mr. Wild194. I hope you're doing well today. I have another book review for you. I hope you enjoy this. Of course, one of my favorite authors of all time is involved with this particular anthology of short stories, kind of on the mixture of horror and sci-fi. More sci-fi in my opinion, kind of mixed with a little bit of a tiny modern day our reality fantasy type of thing mixed in there. Anyway, Jonathan Maberry is involved with this book, and there's three of these books. This one's the first, of course, Limbus, Inc., starring all of these people that are on here. Now, I usually read physical copies of books. This is one of the first digital books I ever bought when I got this Nook years ago. I know this book came out around 2013 or so. Of course, Nook was around before that. I had the Nook longer than that, but I didn't really buy any books when I got my Nook. I might have bought, well, not even bought. I might have just gotten a couple of free books on there. Like, I think The Time Traveler from H.G. Wells, or The Time Travel Machine, whatever it's called. I got that book for free as an ebook here on this years ago, but I think this is the first book I ever actually bought. As big of a Stephen King fan as I was at the time, there's quite a few authors involved here. Jonathan Maberry, as I said. Joseph Nassise, I've never heard of him. Benjamin Kane Ethridge, never heard of him. Brett J. Talley, never heard of him. And Anne C. Petty, I've never heard of her. This book, even though it has kind of a basic cover, I think there's some pretty good entertainment in here to be had. I'll tell you up front, it is not my favorite book I've ever read. It's not my favorite anthology I've ever read, especially because around the time I finally finished this book, because I started this years ago, and I was reading the first book, the first story of this, called The Slaughter Man, which is just hands down the best of the whole book. It was the best one to start it off with because it kept me going, hoping there would be more stories kind of like that. Slaughter Man was phenomenal. I never finished that story for whatever reason, so eventually, right around last year, right around December or so of 2020, the year of hell, I decided to go ahead and pick up the book and finish it. Not that I had the time to, I was still working my job, I still am. I decided to go ahead and pick up the book and try to see if I could finish this book, because it's not super long. It's about 260 pages or so, according to my Nook, and I wanted to finish it. I'm overall glad that I came back and finished it, especially that first story, The Slaughter Man, which was just a wild, wild story. And I'll get more to that in a moment. Now, I'll tell you up front, it's been a while, as you can tell, since I've read this book. I'm not the biggest novel reader. I mostly read books on my other channel, Michael Goosebumps Fan, where I talk about Goosebumps books and stuff, so you can go find that if you want to. But I mostly kind of stick in the area of just shorter books. I usually do that. And I've kind of been trying to broaden out since I got a bunch of Richard Lehman and Bentley Little books for Christmas this year, or last year for 2020, the year of hell, as I said. I'm trying to spend more time reading bigger books and maybe do some reviews here on the channel, not consistently always, but more often, because, you know, I've wanted to do that. It kind of sucks because I know a lot of people are kind of probably frustrated that I went from a comic book channel over to this. I'm sorry, I just kind of think it might be the best route to go. Comics don't really have the biggest following right now. Not that I'm doing it for views, but I wanted it to be worthwhile if I'm going to spend time reading things and talking about things. Even so, Limbus, Inc. Is this book any good? Yeah, it's an anthology series. You're going to have good stories. You're going to have rougher stories that aren't the greatest. You're going to have straight-up bad stories. I can't remember if I thought any story in here was actually straight-up bad. Apparently my light is trying to flash. We've had the power go on and off a couple of times last night, so I don't know if it's going to happen again. Hopefully it does not, because I have a lot of things plugged up to try to aim light over here, and that one too. Anyway, you're going to have a mixture of good and bad stories. I don't think there was anything particularly horrible in this book. There were stories that I was not very engaged with. I wouldn't call that bad. You know, badly would be poorly executed in the writing, and so on and so on. You have some characters like the Slaughter Man of the title, well, not title story, but first story of the book that I love. I thought he was just a fascinating character. The stuff that happens in that story is crazy. To start this book off with Benjamin Kane Ethridge, the Slaughter Man story, that's just a home run. Basically, a guy who works in a slaughterhouse gets brought into this place called Limbus, Inc. Now, if you don't know what Limbus, Inc. is, especially, it's kind of a situation where it's like a business. Kind of like when you go to these places that help you find a job. What are they called? I can't for the life of me remember what they're called. But anyway, you know what I'm talking about, those kinds of places. And they give you a card, and sometimes you're not even looking for a card, you just might be doing something else, like opening a library book or something, and you might see a card in there that says, "We employ Limbus, Inc." They give you a certain phone number to call and stuff, and then they try to find you a job. The biggest catch with this, which makes me want to read the second and third books in this series as well, I don't think there's any more than 2 or 3 books, but still, fascinating premise to have 3 entire anthology books based on. So, you'll contact them to try to get a job with them, and you don't know what it's going to be, just like you don't when you're looking for a job for these kind of employment places. And it usually ends up being something advertised like, let's say, dog walking, right? and then it's something much more bizarre than that. And like I said, there's a lot of sci-fi elements in here, kind of mixed with horror. The Slaughterman is the best example of this, that kind of brutality of working in a slaughterhouse, but then how that turns into what his job is completely wild. I won't tell you anything about it, but it is more sci-fi in essence. I loved it. I thought it was the best story in here, hands down. I love my Jonathan Maberry, but man, Benjamin Kane Ethridge. I will totally check out more of your stuff, man, because this was a freaking home run, dude. Alright, so the next story was called The Sacrifice. I'll let you know again, in case I haven't already said it. I'm pretty sure I said it. I put the word again on there, but even so, I don't remember most of this book. I'll be honest with you. I remember a lot of it. I remember chunks and pieces that are burned into my brain, but not all of it, so bear with me on this. The Sacrifice by Brett J. Talley is one of those stories I don't remember much about at all. I don't know. I'm sorry. The next story here is One Job Too Many, Joseph Nassise. I don't remember anything about that. We Employ by Anne C. Petty. I don't remember that. The last story before the epilogue is Strip Search by Jonathan Maberry. I do remember quite a bit about that. It's kind of a detective story about people finding young women murdered. Kind of an interesting detective story. It's not just a detective story. It's kind of a supernatural story a little bit, too. This is kind of more of a horror thing than a sci-fi thing, but that's what I'm saying. This whole anthology series can have kind of a blend of both. That's good having a mesh of all of them. I'm curious about how many of these authors came back for the following up books. I'm curious if there are even any of them there. I haven't looked, but yeah. I know I haven't remembered many of these, but I remember bits and pieces of other stories. I remember one in particular was a guy doing a job interview with a particular boss, and it was like an assassination thing. Like, he was told he had to go kill somebody for his particular job. That was a really, really good story, too. That may have been Joseph Nassise, One Job Too Many. I don't remember. But I know there's another story in here, too. And I tried, by the way, to go in through these stories and try to... You have to realize how these are written, the way they're kind of intricate, so it's a little bit more difficult to go in and find what was what and what story was about what, so just forgive me, I'm just telling you about bits and pieces. There's another story in here, kind of what I just previously mentioned about somebody getting a job to walk a dog for a living. That story was a little too weird to me. That's the one that I was kind of like, it's not bad, but it's not good. You know, it's not engaging. It's kind of just whatever. It was a weird take on the subject matter they were going for. When you get to the core of what it's about and the dog walking situation, it's kind of fascinating in the lore aspect. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings in that respect. I haven't read Lord of the Rings, but I constantly hear this all the time. I kind of feel like it won't be my kind of thing for this very reason. It seems like it's very awesome lore, very interesting stuff that's developed, very, very thoroughly developed, very well written, very interesting. But there's an overabundance of it, and it almost overflows you with too much, you know? This is the kind of situation where it's almost like I'm not sure how the execution is entirely great with that particular story involving the dog walking. But there's kind of like a tying story amongst these. You ever seen something like VHS, the horror anthology series? You know how they have kind of a situation where there's a tying story. Everything loops into one big story overall. Like, for example, in the first VHS film, you have a guy watching movies on a cassette tape in a dingy little room. Well, it's a bunch of guys, but still, as he watches these, he puts a new VHS tape in, that new short film, or in this case, short story, plays, and he watches that, and we watch it, I guess, sort of kind of like him, or with him, or as him, something like that. This story in particular that's kind of tying all these stories together is actually a guy that owns a used bookstore who's reading these stories. And we don't know this at first. I think this wasn't even really revealed until about halfway through by Brett J. Talley's story that he's going through. They're only like very small segments, like 10-page segments. But this guy, I think his name was Matt or something, he owns a used bookstore. He opens up a used book and he's reading these accounts of the stories that we're reading, which is kind of interesting. I'm kind of curious what Limbus, Book 2 and Book 3 will do, if they'll have any more of this continuation of this. But he starts to see people in suits and stuff, which are the way Limbus Inc. will typically approach you if they approach you without a card. Very interesting stuff. There's a lot of cool aspects to how this world works with the Limbus Inc. theme. I like that. I do like that. I hope that the next couple of books are better than this one. I know I kind of rambled all over the place about different things. I don't mean to. But overall, the writing of these stories is competent. It's mostly good. Mostly. Not always, but mostly. You have stuff like this, like the dog walking story. That's, again, these stories are meant to be more than meets the eye stories, and that's fine. I'm cool with that. I just don't know how much I liked this book overall. It's a decent read if you want something fun. Again, Maberry brings his A game. I think that first story by Benjamin Kane Ethridge, I'm sorry, I can never get that name down right. The Slaughterman story is just phenomenal. I mean, it's just fantastic. Easily hands down the best book or best story in here. And it's a long one too. It's like 100 pages, if not longer. But even so, I really, really, really love the book in a lot of ways. There are some problems with it. It ain't perfect. It ain't terrible. But is it worth your time if you like horror anthologies or sci-fi anthologies? Yeah, absolutely. Check it out. If you like anthology books in general, short story collections, check it out. It's kind of cool how it's done. I like this idea because you don't really see this very often in horror anthologies. You might see something like the DOA series, which are Dead on Arrival Extreme Horror Collection. I'm currently reading the second book of that. I'm about to review the first book that I finished a while back. And they're just people writing brutal, horrific, extreme horror stories involving all kinds of brutality in the world and just evil. And they just write what they want and they put it in there. It doesn't have to be based around supernatural stuff or just slasher stuff. It doesn't have to be like that. This series is kind of like a different thing. They have an actual theme with the Limbus Inc. thing. Every story has to involve that or involve the card showing up, somebody getting a job that way. Even one particular story was a guy... Oh, the assassination story I talked about that I thought was really entertaining. It was really, really entertaining, actually, how the twists in that worked. The thing is, with the sci-fi aspects in here, you can have everything from time travel to alternate reality, you can have aliens, you can have all kinds of stuff in here. It's super bizarre, it's super expansive on what they do. Again, there's like, kind of, Jonathan Maberry, for example, has a lot of kind of folklore type stuff within his story. He's a very folklore-based guy, he loves that stuff. I love hearing him talk about that stuff. He's fascinating to hear talk about, the stuff his grandmother used to tell him about with urban legends and stuff. I love that stuff. Maberry has a lot of those essences in his story, as pieces of his story. I think that's pretty cool. So anyway, what did I think about Limbus Inc.? It's not a complete loss. I'm trying to get back to the title page on my Nook. Not a complete loss. I like the book a lot. I like enough to recommend it to the right audience. Not everybody, but to the right audience. If this sounds like something you might like, you'll probably like it. Honestly, that's a good bet. That's a good bet for the money you'd have to pay for it. I like it. I think it's pretty decent for what it is. Pretty solid read. Again, some aspects I would say I straight up love, like that first story, The Slaughterman. I think there's no way to improve that story. This is great. It was fantastic. Had me wanting to read the whole book after I finished that story. Even so, I think all the authors did a relatively decent job. Your characters are not the most developed because these are short stories, so you gotta give them kind of a leeway a lot of the time. The Slaughterman story is great. That character, the Slaughterman, is just fantastic. I don't think you even get a name for that guy. I think his name is just the Sticker all the time, involving slaughterhouse lingo. Anyway, if I had to rate Limbus Inc. on a 5-star basis, I think I'd give it about a 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed a lot of this. It's just, it has its problems and flaws that kind of come in the way. Like I said, the dog walking story was probably the least favorite of mine, from what I remember. So, there's that. But overall, it's recommendable, I would say, to the right audience, as I said. Anyway, what did you think about Limbus Inc. if you've read it? Are you going to read the second and third books if you've read this one? You probably don't have to read them in order, but I don't know yet. I can't promise that because I haven't read the other two. You probably will have to read them in order with that whole tie-in story, but I don't know. I could be wrong about that. What are your thoughts? Put them down below, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and may the Lord Jesus Christ bless you guys today, and goodbye. And happy Valentine's Day, too, because it's Valentine's Day, so that's pretty cool. Goodbye.